Welcome everyone. I am excited to be a part of the introduction for you all to the ezyVet electronic medical record system. Now this is a much anticipated and long awaited change from our previous electronic medical record system, and I hope through these instructional videos you will see that this really is a system that affords much more efficiency and effectiveness with the way that we handle our workflow from day to day, all the way from admission to discharge. And so one thing that's important to note here is that fortunately or unfortunately you are all a part of this introductory process in which we are all adjusting to the way this system can suit our needs. And so throughout this process, please be critical of the way in which you use the system and how you would like it to work for you, because there is functionality that is coming down the pipeline that will make your lives easier eventually but doesn't exist right now. So some examples are the ezyVet Link portal, the smart flow integration for everybody in the hospital and not just for anesthesia. And so as you are encountering these learning videos that you will be watching, please note that new videos will be rolling out over time as new integrations get added. And then also keep in mind that there may be other ways in which you learn things that are not associated with a video, but it does have to happen over time depending on the needs of the hospital and the needs of the system. And so the other side of that is if there is something that you notice you need in ezyVet, for example, there is a type of result that you just can't find a place for, and you would like that integration to be put in, please have an open line of communication with the project team to discuss your ideas, your thoughts, because that communication benefits everybody, and this will be an ever-evolving system. The workflow will change to improve the way that you interact with the system so that we can have the most effective, streamlined way that we deal with our patients electronically. Additionally, be creative about ways that you can digitize and streamline existing procedures that don't yet have a place in ezyVet, because very likely there is a way that we can make it integrate, and the less that you have to be putting information in different places and training your students and your technicians, this is the way that we do it and this is a slight change from that, the more that we can streamline things and make everything uniform and make the system work for us, the better off. So on that note, I'm going to dive right into explaining some introductory functionalities of the ezyVet system that I think if you understand these before you watch the instructional videos, you'll have a better time understanding why there are certain tasks that are asked of you when you're doing a certain task. And so the first thing to describe to you is that there is a hierarchy within the ezyVet system. So what you'll notice here at the top of the screen is that there's a number of tabs that refer to different functionalities. Some of these tabs may be visible to certain users as opposed to others. So for example, an admin tab might not be visible to everybody. But the important thing to note is the sense of hierarchy that exists. And so the contacts tab is a list of everybody who has the potential to be contacted by the system. So that's not only clients, that's referring veterinarians, that's pet insurance companies, etc. And some contacts, as I described, can have patients, so those would be our clients. And then when you look up a contact, you will see all of their patients. But when you look up a specific patient, you won't be able to see the other ones that are assigned to that contact. So you can see how there's a bit of granularity that begins here as we sort of jump down these tabs, where the client within the contacts, you can see all of the client's patients and then all of the clinical records that exist for every single patient that is associated with that client. But as you get a step more granular and you just search a patient, then all you'll be able to see is the clinical records that are associated with that patient, and you won't be able to see any others. Similarly, when you jump down to this clinical tab, you will be looking at a single snapshot in time of one visit that is associated with a single patient, and so you can see how the specificity changes depending on sort of what color you're dealing with. And then there's the dashboard. The dashboard is another location in which you can see a lot of things at once, but you do have some ability to customize your view. And so the dashboard is where you will be looking at the calendar and then also at actionable items that are relevant to you. So probably the tabs that you'll be visiting the most will be the communication tab, the diagnostics tab, and potentially the work list and medications tab. And so when you click these tabs, you'll be able to see every single communication for every single patient that's coming through the hospital system. Similarly, the diagnostics tab will show you all of that unless you indicate some kind of filter. So that brings me to my next point. Once you understand the hierarchy within ezyVet, you then gain a bit more information about how to actually find something that you're interested in finding. So do you need to go to the blue section, the purple section, the green section, the orange section? That's sort of the first question to answer. The second question to answer is, to what extent are you filtering the way that you are viewing information? And so the first level of filtration is actually when you log in initially, you will have to select a department. And there will be an instructional video to show you this, but essentially when you pick a department, that department has decided that there are certain sets of templates and other functionalities that they have customized that are related to the way that their service operates, such that if you are in one service and you're looking for a template, you will only be able to see templates that that service has decided are relevant to you. And so it's always important to make sure you're in the right department, because if you're in the wrong one, then you might not be able to find what you're looking for. So that's sort of the first level of where filtering your view becomes very important to make sure that you're actually viewing the right things. The other place and places where that becomes important is when you're applying filters to search results. And so you can see here how I've typed in a specific veterinarian as well as a specific supplier, and so I'm only seeing diagnostic results for that purpose. And so if I were to erase these two things, then you can see how a ton of other things show up. And so that's another way that you can further refine results that you're looking at, but also ways that you can reflect back and say, I'm not finding the thing I'm looking for. Is it my filters that are the problem? Another place where that comes into play is when you are ordering information related to a clinical visit. So I'm just going to go into a patient really quickly to show you what that looks like. Don't worry about the actions that I'm taking because you'll learn this in another video, but this is an example of a time when you're going to be ordering something for a patient, like a diagnostic. You're always going to be refining your results when you are ordering something. So for example, when you're ordering imaging, you have to identify a supplier. And when you type in imaging here and then you select a type of imaging, then the only diagnostics that become available to you are the types of requests that are listed under that supplier. So this again becomes an example of a time where, if I can't find the thing that I'm looking for, perhaps I should be using a different supplier. The other thing to note here is that that addressed the filtration issue, where it could either benefit you to filter things because it'll make it easier to find something, or it might be a point of reflection where you have to say, I'm not finding something, let me check my filters. The other thing to note here is that there is a level of filtration that is important for revenue, for research, for searchability purposes, for workflow, and the most important example of that is assigning an appropriate case owner, which is the veterinarian who is responsible for that case, and then making sure that that information is consistent throughout every single request or communication, or just in general any action that is taken on that patient's medical record. And so for example, you'll see here when I'm requesting imaging for this individual patient, a vet has automatically been filled in here, and it's always your job to make sure that when a vet field is located in the box that you're taking an action in, that you just double check that name and make sure that the vet is appropriate, because that will determine a lot of the billing, that it determines the way we track revenue, it determines the way that veterinarians can then go in and search for things that are listed under their name. So this is very, very critically important to make sure it's correct. And one quick way to just make sure that the veterinarian is always correct is, if you're in a medical record, you know that it's green, medical record, on the left hand side you'll always be able to see the case owner, and then you can click it and change it, and so that's how things automatically fill in here. And so that's sort of my third point, where when you are taking actions, just make sure that you are assigning the appropriate person to that action, because it influences a lot of the way that people search things, the way that the hospital tracks things, and the way that charges are generated. So definitely keep that in mind every time you're doing something. And overall, just keep in mind that the way I'm describing these things is all meant to improve your workflow, your revenue, the teamwork that goes on in the hospital, the way we communicate with each other. And so by being consistent and by being efficient the way that we do these things, then it will just improve everybody's day, because everybody's going to be able to find the things that they're looking for and communicate effectively. The next things to note here that I want to just point out is that on a number of screens that you encounter in ezyVet, there will be ways that you can customize your view. And so most often, if there is a way for you to customize your view, it'll probably be in the upper right-hand corner or some variation of the upper middle/right side of the screen. And so, for example, here I have a couple of different tabs that are available where I can see different stuff for this clinical record. And if I click this different customization viewer, you can see how the buttons change, and I can search for different things. Similarly, this other button here offers a little bit more functionality for me to customize my view, and so it will be called out in the instructional videos when you have an opportunity to customize, but just keep in mind that if you're looking at something and you're like, this looks different than the way that I have seen it on other screens and perhaps have seen it in the instructional videos, then you may just want to look to see, do I have a customization set that's different than the way that it has been set for somebody else or for the other video? And so in general, I do try to address that in the instructional videos, but if you forget and you're like, this screen looks a little bit different, then another place to check would be the customization viewers. And another example of the customization viewers, just really quickly, is in your dashboard on the calendar. There's a number of different ways that you can display things. So if I set the time interval to every 6 minutes, then that totally changes the way that this information is displayed. So that's just another point to keep in mind. Another thing that might help you out when you're interacting with the system is refreshing the page. And so, for example, let's say you take an action, like you create an appointment, and then you don't see that it shows up, but you know that you clicked save and close. You can just right-click on any tab and then click this refresh button, and it will reload that page. My second to last point to keep in mind, just talking generally about this system and the way we interact with it, is that throughout the process of entering in information for a patient, one of the streamlines that is in stark contrast to the previous medical record system is the fact that when you take an action on a patient, for example, you order imaging, the action of billing for that thing that you do is automatic, and it's tied to the request that you make. So for example, if I was to request some kind of diagnostic testing for this patient here, so I'm just going to type in something really quickly as an example, what you will see is that a billing trigger will show up based on whatever you chose. And so this is an example of a billing trigger, and all I had to do was select a specific diagnostic in order for this to show up. Now the billing trigger is tied to the invoice, and so when I click submit and that request gets processed, the charge is automatically uploaded to the invoice such that you don't need to go in and charge for things separately. So there's two important things to note here about billing triggers. One is, if a billing trigger shows up, don't touch it. There is no way in ezyVet where we can sort of lock this down such that users aren't able to adjust billing triggers. And so if you see a billing trigger pop up, don't touch it unless you know that you have to. For example, if you're a technician responsible for putting in the surgery charges for something that happened, then you will have the ability to edit billing triggers. But if it is not your job, then don't touch the billing triggers. The reason why is because if it's not as simple as I don't want to charge for this thing, so I'm going to take the billing trigger away. It's actually tied to the inventory and the way that things are tracked in terms of the revenue. And so when you think about erasing a billing trigger, what happens in the system is the item will be used, but then there will be no track of it. And so essentially the billing office will have to find do a lot of research to figure out where that charge went, and then they'll end up calling the client and they'll have to still pay. And so it's just easier for everybody if you don't touch the billing triggers. And then the other thing to note about this is if a billing trigger doesn't seem appropriate, then just communicate with the service to say, actually I only want one view of the abdomen, and so, the imaging service, for example, will be responsible for adjusting the billing trigger. So even if you feel like it's inappropriate, just communicate with somebody, but still don't touch it. The other thing to note about billing triggers is that if a billing trigger is not showing up for something that you know there is a charge for, so a good example is if a consult is performed and you're entering in consult results in ezyVet, a charge is not generated for that action, you will need to go into the invoice and then manually add a charge for that if a billing trigger doesn't show up. And there is an instructional video for that, but just keep that in mind, is make sure that you're looking for billing triggers, and if they don't show up, then you know that you need to go into the invoice manually and add that charge. Another point to discuss there is if you're doing that all the time and manually adding that charge in all the time, then communicate with the project team so that they can add a billing trigger for the action that you're doing to save you a step and to save you that time, because that's what this is all about. The last thing I'm going to discuss is that in general, the way that we are teaching you in these instructional videos to interact with ezyVet is a streamlining process such that all of the services are acting essentially the same and interacting with the system essentially the same. Now, of course, there is a recognition that every service, does different things and orders different kinds of testing and operates differently than all of the other services, but the way that all of that gets translated into ezyVet is now going to be the same from service to service. And so that brings up the note of discharge instructions. Discharges are going to be different now in ezyVet, and I implore you all to really listen to the discharging a patient introductory video so that you can understand what the different customization options are for you when you send a discharge summary home with a patient, and then also to recognize that everything that you load into the system is something that you could potentially send home to the client, and now it sort of becomes a discussion between you as the doctor and the client of, what information would you like to be sent home with you today? I'll definitely send you your medication instructions, your to go home instructions, but what else would you like to see? And so discharges will all be handled the same now, and it's just this summary section within a clinical record. And the important thing to note there is that the discharge summary is no longer a sort of ground for entering information that doesn't have another place. For example, we did a SNAP test and it was positive for FELV. There wasn't really a place in the old medical record system to enter that information, and so it would go in the discharge, or it would be put on a piece of paper and scanned into the medical record. And now there is a place for everything, and so it no longer needs to go in the discharge summary. So just pay attention to that video, because it will be a variation of what you're familiar with, but there are some stark differences that are important to keep in mind.